mention a quote attributed to a Russian general. In Asia, the harder you hit them, the longer they remain quiet. We were once a brave nation of warriors feared by invaders with a rich cultural heritage. How have we fallen down so much that we seem to have lost our own relevance as a nation in the international arena?
Well, I think the essential thing is that we have taken too much pride in our cultural heritage. There's no doubt that we are very rich in terms of culture, and that is why we sort of assimilated ourselves, conquered, if you wish to call it, in Southeast Asia through culture and through assimilation. In fact, even today, whether you go to Indonesia and Bali or parts of Malaysia and other parts of Vietnam, Cambodia, you see signs of rich Indian cultural heritage. And that is why Indians are respected also. But at the same time, while Indians are respected and tolerated and assimilated, it does not mean that Indians are feared. Indians are taken as a weak race who can be sort of tampered around with. So the question comes to the same thing, that it is a question of how, you see, even in a family, when we grow up, we don't tell children to go and fight and take revenge. We tell children, nahi, bahar jaake ladai nahi karna. So we grow up with that temperament. This does not mean that our army is no good. The fact is that at a certain level, we decide that fighting is no good. And the result translates into a sort of weakness at an international level.
Okay. In your book, you have quoted the Times statement endorsing the creation of Pakistan. The Times magazine then said, in the hour of creation, Pakistan emerges as a leading state of the Muslim world. From today, Karachi takes rank as the new center of Muslim cohesion and rallying point of Muslim thoughts and aspirations. Today, a failed state dependent on American subsidy and a hotbed of terrorism. Were the British really responsible for creating this situation and completely failing to understand the monster they were unleashing?
Well, that's a very fundamental question as to why Pakistan was created. What was the need to divide a country into two when culturally, racially, we were one? Geographically also, if you look at the geographical map of South Asia, you would find that Afghanistan is one distinct area because mountains, the high mountains start from the Afghanistan border. The rest is plains, especially starting from Indus downwards. Similarly, Nepal is one distinct entity, and beyond Bangladesh, there is Southeast Asia starting from Myanmar. So, geographically speaking, India pre-47 made a natural case for a single nation. But why did the Britishers do it? The Britishers did it for two reasons. One, they thought that leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, and Sardar Patel were the ones who were, if I may loosely call that word, mischief makers against the Britishers. Whereas leaders like Jinnah and so on, they were conniving with the Britishers. And that is why Jinnah did not stay in jail even for a single day. Whereas Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel spent half of the 14 last years before 1947 in jail. That means they spent 7 years in jail. So Britishers had a thing against larger India. I won't call it Indo-India, but larger India. And they wanted, as Winston Churchill put it to Lord Wavell, he said, keep a bit of India. That means divide India, parcel out a portion for us for strategic reasons. Because they thought that India, as it was led by Mahatma Gandhi and others, would not accommodate British strategic interests either in the Gulf Arab region or in Southeast Asia region. So they wanted a state where they could have their bases, where they could have a leadership which was friendly to them and agreeable to them. So the reason really was not any historical necessity, not any racial necessity or geographical need. The reason was the British desire A, to punish India, and B, to keep a bit of India for their strategic reasons.
Okay. You have been a diplomat. See, we first nurtured Nepal. We had some of the biggest leaders study in our universities. We helped create Bangladesh. We once had very cordial relations with Sri Lanka. Then we goofed up majorly. Now we see, Nepal always plays China against us. Bangladesh is becoming a hotbed of terrorism, and most of the time the terrorists are against India. Sri Lanka, we burnt our fingers. We sent IPKF and then we withdrew with our tail between the legs. So why do we goof up on our foreign policy and our matters of dealing with our neighbors?
Well, let me tell you from my personal experience. I will not blame diplomats for every ill of the country, but my first charge as a young diplomat was relations with Nepal and Bhutan. So I asked people who knew the subject, other diplomats and so on, the same question as you're asking now, that why our relations with Nepal, the only Hindu kingdom in the world, are at a stage which can be called diplomatically delicate. So he gave me one very interesting example. He said in 1947 or 48, we decided that let us build a small hydroelectric dam on Bihar-Nepal border. So Nepalese, being very trusting, they signed on whatever maps were shown to them, hydrological data and maps of the dam. When the dam was built, they realized that Nepal side of that dam was flooded with water, so their agricultural lands were gone. The Indian side was all lit up and diesel pumps were starting to pump water into the fields. And the contract signed by Nepal also had a clause that they will not get any payment for the electricity generated. Now, even if it was a small dam, 2 megawatts or 5 megawatts, but that memory lingers. Till today, we have not been able to set up a major hydroelectric dam in Nepal. Whereas we've set up many hydroelectric dams in Bhutan because the terms were transparent, we were not looking for small bureaucratic gains, and it was a good fair share between the two countries. So a small little mistake by someone down the chain can cause immense harm. So it's not diplomatic goof up, it is a goof up at the human level. Like recently, for example, there was a blockade and the price of gas cylinder, most of the gas in kitchens in Nepal is through gas cylinder, and all the gas cylinders till Chinese start supplying it come from India. So instead of 40 rupees or 400 rupees a cylinder, the costs went up to 2000 or 4000 rupees. Till today, people have not forgotten it. They still remember that India blockaded us and it caused immense amount of problem for us. I'll give you another example. During the earthquake in Nepal, India had flown out its aircrafts within 3 hours or 4 hours. It was a tremendous effort by any global standards. And initially, there was a lot of praise in Nepal for what India was doing. But then, some eager television people landed there and they started asking questions which are not polite. I'll give you one example. One reporter asked a woman who was grieving, who was crying, what has happened to you? So she said, I've just lost my son because the roof fell on him. So what is your feeling? Are you happy or are you crying? Now, this is exactly the question that he was asking. And this was telecast all over, not just in India, but also in Nepal. So when you have a question like this, can you imagine the effect, long-term effect it will have? Not just on people, but also up the ladder on the decision makers also. So the thing is that despite our heritage, despite our emphasis on culture, there are mistakes at a human level where our insensitivity causes huge amounts of problems for the country.
Okay, you talked about dam. Indus Water Treaty. I think one of the most biased water agreement we have ever seen in the global arena. Why did Nehru agree to sign it? And despite such an acrimonious relationship with Pakistan, when our own agriculture is suffering in in our part of the country, we allow water to irrigate Pakistani fields, and that also the fields which are mostly occupied or are under Pakistani generals. So why have we never thought about doing away with the agreement and doing what is right for our nation?
You have hinted at it that it is a very generous agreement. I would add that there is no instance, there is no parallel in history of the world where a country has virtually given up its water for the sake of another country. Look at what is happening with China. There are newspaper reports which you must have read that Brahmaputra, black water is coming. Because again reports, one can't be sure at this time, but the reports are they are diverting Brahmaputra waters for their deserts in Takla, Akan. So that is one example where China thinks that water flowing through its territory belong to it. And that is why the water treaty of the world has been held up, because China and some other countries feel that they have absolute sovereignty over the waters starting flowing in its territory. On the other hand, Pandit Nehru, the same gentleman who signed the treaty in 1960, had stopped Indus waters, the 6 rivers, waters flowing into Pakistan for nearly 2 months. And Pakistan was really crying at that time. Why did he then turn around and decide to agree to this most generous treaty? There are a couple of reasons. One prime is that USA, the American ambassador in Islamabad, sent a telegram to Washington saying that India and Pakistan are both facing financial difficulties at this moment. This telegram was sent in 1959. India more so, because Pakistan at that time was a little more comfortable economically. This is the time to teach Nehru the rules of international behavior, and let us get him to sign on the dotted line on Indus waters. After that, the World Bank got into the act, and we agreed to whatever terms the World Bank decided to set, with the result that 80% of our water goes to Pakistan, 20% remains with us. Even of that 20%, till date, we are not utilizing it fully. The second part of the question is whether we can unilaterally alter terms of the agreement. The agreement itself gives you scope to change your water usage because population has expanded, your industrial base has expanded, your agricultural needs have expanded. There is no agreement in the world which can stop you from using for these 3 purposes. But we are not utilizing that. Thirdly, there is no agreement in the world which, if signed under duress, as I told you with the case of the American ambassador's telegram, or false premises, that means false assumptions, that should stay on forever. The third part is that Turkey, for example, used to supply Tigris and Euphrates water to Syria and Iraq. In 70s, it decided unilaterally that Turkey's needs are greater. They need to build hydroelectric dams, they need to use it for generating electricity for industrial purposes, agriculture and so on. So they decided to abrogate, to cancel the agreements and to use as much water as they wanted. And that was the time when Turkey started developing industrially. There were other reasons also, but that moment onwards, it did not look back economically after that. So there is nothing legally, contractually, or in terms of any bilateral or international arrangement which stops us from reworking Indus Water Treaty. In any case, there is no international rule or set of guidelines with regard to water usage between upper and lower riparian state. I mean, from where the river starts and where it flows. But again, the issue is that besides being generous, we are too polite to take up this issue.